What's something that almost got you killed? Don't know whether I would have been killed or not, but it was a possible outcome. I survived an attempted kidnapping when I was around 6 or 7. A red car pulled up to our driveway while me and my siblings were playing outside. 2 men were in the car. The driver stuck his hand out of the window and gave us all money each, €2 to be exact. Then the other guy got out of the car and told me he's going to take me to a fun place. Being the stupid kid I was, I took his hand and he started walking me to the back of the car. My older sister grabbed my other hand and pulled me back. They drove away after losing grip on me. Anyways, after we told my parents, they got so mad at me lol. They made me repeat never walk away with strangers at least 100 times over. My sister potentially saved my life that day. Year was 2001. Just left a buddy's house with 4 of my buddies in a small-ass 1980s Plymouth Reliant. We were only a 1/4 mile away. I was in the passenger back seat. We pulled up to a stop sign on a busy road. Driver didn't really fully stop and pulled out into the street. An F-350 was barreling down the road and hit us going 70 miles per hour. I was on the impact side. We got pushed 40 to 50 feet or more into a gas station, coming within 3 feet of a gas pump. I was knocked unconscious and woke up roughly 15 minutes later. In a daze, unsure what had happened. When I came to, I just remember being hunched over. And first thing I noticed was my jaw didn't feel right. I moved it left to right and it just made the worst popping sounds. I remember looking up and seeing police lights flashing everywhere. They ended up using the jaws of life to get me out. Ended up breaking both my mandibles and my jaw. My left clavicle, 3 places in my pelvis and my collarbone. Couldn't walk for 3 months. Jaw was wired shut. Ended up making a full recovery and living a normal life. I was 19 at the time, even enlisted in the Navy the following year. 41 today and suffer from some joint ailments and dull aches and pains, but that's about it. Happy to answer any questions. Oh, and everyone survived miraculously. I fell out of the raft while whitewater rafting. Our guide was great about telling us where to go if we fell out during certain rapids. On this particular rapid he said if you fall out on this one, well, just don't fall out. So anyway, I fell out on that rapid. My shoulder hit a rock hard enough to tear the skin off. I heard the guide yell "oh shit" right as I got pulled under. I don't know how long I was under for, but it seemed like forever and everything slowed down. When I came back up, the guide had his paddle stretched out just barely out of reach. We both stretched a little further and I grabbed the paddle and got pulled back into the raft. Apparently, earlier that week someone had died on that rapid after falling out. I was returning a DVD to the collection bin in the parking lot. I had a girlfriend in my truck with me. I pulled up, put my window down and started to put the DVD through my window. I hit the frame and it knocked the DVD out of my hand onto the ground. I jumped out to pick it up without putting my truck in park. My door hit one of the steel poles protecting that bin from idiots. But not this one. My door trapped my head between it and my truck. Car isn't in park, so it's moving forward and crushing my head. I could feel the bones moving in my skull. The girl in my truck couldn't see what was going on clearly. She was laughing. I got my foot inside and hit the brake, shifted into reverse, and freed my head. Had a good dent for a couple of weeks. I hate to think about panicking and hitting the gas that day. Stupidity did that. My family and I were on a little trip to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, driving around the forest area, admiring the white waters. After a moment, my dad pulled over at a spot where there was just a little bit of road with just enough room to walk along the edge. My mom and dad got out with their phones. They told me if I got out I would fall, so I took that as a challenge, of course. I was on the side where, if I opened the door and stepped out, I would have plummeted into rocks, sticks, and a shit ton of old trash, plus a strong current below. But, being a stupid pubescent 13-year-old, I decided to test my luck. Same second I stepped out, I cartoonishly plummeted. I managed to grab onto a strong root with my right hand and dug my nails into the dirt with the other, desperately trying to hold on. My dad noticed instantly and bolted over to my dumbass and angrily gripped my wrists, lifting me up like a crazed gorilla. What was insane was that he was at least 4 feet away, but he reached me in like half a second. The most impressive part is at the time, my dad was morbidly obese, yet he moved faster than I had ever seen a human move. He saved my life that day. Not too crazy of a story, but just felt like sharing. TLDR. I was a dumbass and stepped out of my car and nearly plummeted to a rocky and sharp river with a current. A stranger and my best friend. Stranger drugged me at a bar, but I OD'd. Ended up in cardiac arrest. My friend waited 3-5 hours to call EMS because she thought I was being dramatic and drunk. She also failed to perform CPR on me correctly, on my clavicle, after telling me 6 months prior I was stupid and didn't know CPR, been in medical care for 10 years and CPR trained since I was 16, and that she was smarter than me despite never taking a single CPR class. She had the audacity to act like she saved my life after all was said and done. I was lucky her 16-year-old brother was at the apartment when she finally managed to get me upstairs and throw me on the couch. He called EMS the third time I collapsed. She let me fall down 2 flights of stairs 3 times. I woke up several days later on life support with a busted nose, 2 black eyes, a busted mouth, fractured clavicle, fractured leg, and tendons torn in my arm. She thought I couldn't remember anything, but I remember bits and pieces, enough to know how much of an a-hole she is. TLDR, be careful of who your friends are. Turns out she was a super jealous and insecure person who didn't care about me at all, and envied me to the point she wanted to see me burn. Working tired and in a rush. Worked late about 14 hours trying to please my boss. I was way too tired to be working, and my co-worker and I were rushing to get done to go home. I'm a painter and was cutting in the top part of the wall on a 4-foot scaffold. I was on the tip top and missed the step board on the way down. My foot went in between the boards and vaulted the back of my head into the concrete at what I assume a decent speed. I was entirely unconscious, but my co-worker came over, and he said I just looked stiff. And then I seized then limp and then seized and limp. He called 911. And the whole 10 to 15 minutes. He said I would seize go limp and then seize again. He heard the sirens and said the last thing he saw was me go limp and start snoring aggressively. Agonal breaths. Luckily, I woke up not knowing anything. And I mean, I had no clue my own name, couldn't recognize my wife, couldn't tell them where I lived, and it took several days to be able to remember some things. Drive, said that fall. And the damage to my head should have killed me. Boss stuck me with the $15K hospital bill and told everyone I worked for myself. I had a focal seizure a few days later, and now I'm dependent on epilepsy meds and can't function without them and will never be off them. I have never been the same since the injury. Lesson: don't do anything extra for your boss, they don't care whatsoever about you. In December of 2019 I had a friend from college with an early 2000s Toyota Corolla that he had just brought all the way from Colorado where he was from to Ohio where we went to school, along with bringing back the car. While home, my friend had also just got a new phone, as this was all shortly after a school break freshman year. One day after class he asked me and my other buddy to go with him to the AT&T store to get everything transferred over to the new phone. Well, we decided we'd go. My other buddy who was coming was a big stoner and always smoked weed. He had a pen and offered me a hit before we left, and at the time I had very rarely smoked and had never smoked during the day before. I decided I would since I wasn't going to be driving or having anything going on the rest of the day. So I agreed to take a hit and we hit the road. It was a cold winter day, roughly 31 to 32 degrees out and slight snow flurries, but nothing sticking on the ground. Where we went to school was in a very rural area with nothing very close by. Everything major was about a 20 to 25 minute drive down some very country roads. Well, on our way to the phone store, all 3 of us were sitting and listened to music for a while, but with me being high as someone who doesn't typically smoke, I started to lay my head against the door and close my eyes. As we are driving down this windy country road, I hit my friend say shit and I look up and out the front passenger side window where I am sitting, and I am looking at oncoming lanes. Fortunately no one was driving the other direction as we slid across their lane. I look and see an upcoming ditch with a bunch of brush behind it, thinking it would be a smooth crash. Boy, was I wrong. I hadn't realized that there was a culvert with a concrete lip on it buried in the tall grass. The car did a complete 180 before hitting directly on the passenger side. In the moment I felt the car slide off the road and I felt like I was in the air for a split second and then hit my head, and next thing you know I was up and checking on my friends. By this point we are sitting in the car and my window is completely shattered and my door is almost a V. I looked out the window and the front tire of the car was submerged in water. My friend who was driving, which by the way was totally sober, says, "I think we are on fire." Thankfully we were not, but that got all of us panicked and ready to get out. We all start attempting to get out, but with how hard of a side impact we had on my side, my seat had bent up and towards the center console, so I was trapped and couldn't get my seatbelt off. Thankfully my friends and I were able to pry the plastic of the center console enough for me to barely get my buckle off. Basically, right as we get out of the car, a man rides up to us on a four-wheeler from the house across the street from the accident. He tells us that he had been out hunting 3 miles into the woods and heard us crash and came to make sure we were good. At this point we were just getting out of the car, which makes me believe I may have been knocked out at some point because it all happened so fast it felt. We then went and stood in the neighbor's driveway waiting for police. First the police arrived. While waiting for the ambulance, the police were asking what had happened and such. Well, as we are talking, a pickup truck pulling a trailer starts to lose traction in the same exact spot that we had, but thankfully was able to barely save it. Police shut down the entire road after this in fear for all of our safety. Once the ambulance arrived, my friend driver said that he was having chest pains, so he was the first to go on the stretcher in the ambulance. Truthfully, I think he was freaking out that he was going to get in trouble for crashing the car he just brought here. Also, during the whole crash, both his phones, which were the whole purpose of the trip, had been ejected from the car. I sat there while paramedics were checking on my friend. Next thing you know, a police officer comes into the ambulance and asks who was front passenger in the car. I very reluctantly raised my hand because at the time I was still very paranoid being around police after smoking. He told me I needed to come with him to the second ambulance that had arrived. The cop explained that the reason he needed me specifically was because my side of the car took the majority of the impact and that I was very lucky to be alive. At this point in time I had never seen my side of the car because I had to climb out the driver's side since I couldn't open my door. Once I got to the ambulance, the paramedic says, "Oh, you must be the lucky one." I responded, "I'm pretty sure they told me I got hit the hardest, so I'd guess lucky is what you'd call it." He then told me that I was very lucky to be alive and that with a hit as hard as I took, I'm lucky to be breathing, let alone walking and talking. That hit me very hard in the moment, that everything could have been taken from me right then. The cops also informed me that what we had hit was a 2 to 3 ton concrete culvert grate. We had completely broken a 2 by 2 by 8 block of concrete off of concrete. He also informed me that the car had rolled multiple times, which until that point I had no idea. Went to the hospital with a couple broken ribs, a concussion, and a couple cuts and bruises. Was overall okay, even though they rushed me into a wheelchair and put a neck brace on me as soon as I got there. Went to the tow yard later that night and finally saw my side of the car. My door had caved in about 2 feet. My legs had about 6 to 8 inches of room, and I was just lucky enough that my first instinct was to tilt my legs toward the center console when I knew we were about to crash. The tow truck driver also explained that I was very lucky we didn't any higher up on my door, as it would have came straight through the car and likely ripped all of our legs off. What finally stopped it was it had bottomed out on the frame of the car and actually cracked the frame. We were doing the speed limit, which was 45 miles per hour. Anything can happen. Showed me how quickly life can change for sure. Sorry for the long story.